parents informed me on my 18th Bday that they used up 90% of the trust fund I was eagerly waiting for to pay for my college to fund my disabled sister's shopping addiction treatment and lay out the plan they have for me so that I can keep helping her. So I laugh in their faces and tell them what I am going to do to get them to pay back all my money, and they are not liking it because now they are looking at jail time, thanks to my grandparents. To give you some context, my sister Corey has Down syndrome. She's 4 years older than I am, and from as far back as I can remember, I was aware that my sister was different from me in many ways, even as a young child. I noticed that Corey would often react intensely to every situation. If things didn't go her way, even in small ways, she would scream and cry in a way that most kids didn't. It was like she couldn't handle the frustration of things not lining up with her expectations. Growing up, Corey didn't have any friends. She had trouble picking up on social cues and often came across as blunt or even abrasive. While she wasn't intentionally being rude, her straightforwardness could be off-putting to other kids who didn't understand her condition. As a result, many children chose to keep their distance, which left her feeling isolated. Because of this, my parents made a point of involving me in her social life, often telling me I needed to take her along when I spent time with my friends. I understood that they wanted her to feel included and have someone to interact with, and at first I didn't mind bringing my older sister along. I thought it would be nice for her to have some company and maybe even to make a friend or two through my own social circles. However, spending time with Corey around my friends wasn't easy. Her social skills were limited and she struggled to fit into group settings. Often, she would act out in unexpected ways. Sometimes she would push other kids or even hit them, especially if they had something she wanted. As a result, as time went on, my friends became less interested in hanging out with me if it meant Corey would be there too. They didn't want to deal with the unpredictability of her behavior, and frankly, I understood their perspective. They were just kids who wanted to play without interruptions or sudden bursts of aggression. Corey's impatience and her tendency to lash out made things challenging for everyone, and I couldn't completely fault my friends for stepping back from those situations. I understand that as her sister, I had a role to support and be there for Corey, especially given her challenges. But, honestly, I also needed space to grow, make my own friends, and experience life independently. Yet my parents never allowed me to just be me. Whenever I wanted to do something on my own or spend time with my friends without Corey, they would make me feel guilty for even thinking about leaving her behind. They'd say things like, "Sisters should stick together," or "You need to think about Corey. You're her sister." It was like they expected me to always choose her over my friends or anyone, regardless of what I wanted or needed for myself. What made things harder was that they never seemed to direct these same efforts towards helping Corey understand how to adjust her behavior or improve her social skills. They never sat her down to explain why sharing or being gentle towards everyone might help her connect better with others. Instead, it was as though they simply accepted that I would fill in all the gaps in her social life. And so over the years, I became Corey's only friend by default. Don't get me wrong, I love Corey deeply. She's family, and I understand that none of this is her fault. I know she faces her own set of challenges every single day, and I can't imagine what it feels like to be in her shoes. But at the same time, do you know what it feels like to be the invisible child in a family? My parents' entire world revolved around Corey, with every decision, plan, and dollar aimed at making her life a little easier, a little more comfortable. Corey requires constant support and specialized care. Over the years, my parents have spent so much on her various therapies, including physiotherapy to help with her physical coordination, speech therapy to improve her communication, and occupational therapy to build her motor skills and independence. She also has routine checkups, medical tests and evaluations that monitor her progress and keep her health in check. The level of care she needs is extensive and time-consuming, and while I completely understand its importance, it often felt like there was little room left for me. One of the unique challenges with Corey is her low impulse control, which makes boundaries almost impossible for her to understand. For instance, she has an obsession with the color pink, and she absolutely adores anything pink. If she sees something in that color, it's like an instant magnet for her, and she feels compelled to grab it, hold it, and refuse to let it go. It doesn't matter what it is: a pink wallet, a teddy bear, piece of clothing, or even someone else's cherished possessions. Once it's in her hands, she clings to it, and if anyone tries to take it away, she'll break down in tears and sometimes even having a full-on meltdown. This behavior has led to so many uncomfortable situations, especially when we're out in public. My parents often have to negotiate with people or even buy these pink items from complete strangers just to get Corey to calm down. I've watched them pay for all kinds of random pink things, sometimes things that hold no value to us but mean the world to Corey in that moment. I get why they do it, and I understand that. For her, it's not just a want, it's almost a need that she can't control. But watching my parents pour so much time, money, and emotional energy into soothing her impulses and meeting her needs has made me feel, in a sense, overlooked. Also, my parents' approach to parenting Corey has had drastic consequences. Over the years, their way of keeping her content has spiraled into what I can only describe as a shopping addiction for Corey. It started simply enough. Every weekend my parents would buy her something pink, whether a toy, a piece of jewelry or some other trinket to keep her happy, and in a way to bargain for her cooperation throughout the week. My parents would tell Corey that she needed to be a good girl if she wanted them to let her have whatever it was she wanted, and she would quickly agree. What started as a temporary arrangement soon became a long-standing tradition in our family. These purchases aren't cheap either. Many of the items Corey wants are unique or customized, which often means spending a considerable amount of money. For a long time I didn't pay much attention to the cost of all these pink things. I just assumed my parents were able to cover it. I never questioned how they could afford to keep up with this habit week after week, year after year. But eventually, I discovered something I never could have imagined. My parents hadn't been handling these expenses through regular budgeting or savings. They had been committing fraud to keep up with the mounting costs. You see, when I was born, my grandparents set up a trust fund for me and Corey with equal amounts allocated for each of us. For Corey, who has Down syndrome, the money was intended for her treatments or anything else she might need, while I was expected to use my share for college or to buy a house. Only my parents had access to these funds, but my grandparents trusted them to manage the money responsibly. They also made sure me and Corey knew about these trust funds from an early age so we could depend on this financial support. It was a thoughtful gift from my grandparents, and I always felt a sense of security knowing that the trust fund would be there when the time came. When Corey turned 18, she received her share of the trust fund, and since she still lives with my parents and depends on them, they've been in charge of managing her money. Over the years, they've used her trust fund to help cover the cost of her treatments and therapies, which have become more intensive as she's gotten older. The money has helped with everything from her medical care to supporting the resources she needs for daily living. I understood that the money was meant to take care of her needs, and I never questioned how it was being used. When I turned 18, I naturally expected to receive my share of the trust fund as well, just like I was promised. I had plans for it already. I was going to use the money for my college tuition, and once that was taken care of, I planned to save the rest for any other expenses I'd face as I entered adulthood. I had my future all mapped out, and I was relying on that fund to help me build a stable path forward. But little did I know, my expectations would soon be shattered. Last week, my grandparents threw a grand celebration for my 18th birthday. They had done the same for Corey when she turned 18. So I'd been looking forward to my own party for quite a while. They had invited everyone in the family. I felt genuinely happy surrounded by the people I loved, and it was one of those days that just felt perfect. After the cake was cut, my grandparents made an announcement to the entire room. They shared how proud they were to see me all grown up now and going off to college, and that as their birthday gift to me this year, I'd been receiving the trust fund that they had set up for me years ago. The whole room broke into cheers and applause with people congratulating me on this amazing gift. I felt this wave of excitement and gratitude wash over me as I hugged my grandparents in gratitude and thanked them for everything. But in the midst of all the excitement, I noticed my parents were the only ones who didn't look happy. While everyone else was smiling and congratulating me, my parents seemed almost indifferent. They stood off to the side. Their expressions looked strange, almost uncomfortable. I could see them exchanging glances, and though they didn't say anything, there was an awkwardness about them that was hard to miss. It struck me as unusual, but in the excitement of the party, I didn't think much. I wanted to enjoy the rest of the celebration, so I put it to the back of my mind. Later that evening, after we returned home from the party, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. My parents looked unusually tense and weren't talking much with me. Typically, if they were worried, it was because of something related to Corey, her health, her mood, or something she needed. But that night, Corey seemed perfectly content, even happily playing with one of her new gifts. Sensing that there was more going on, I finally asked my parents if something was wrong. That's when my dad looked at me seriously and told me that he and my mom needed to have a private conversation with me. The tone of his voice immediately sent a chill down my spine. I could tell this was something serious. We sat down together in the living room, and they exchanged worried glances before my dad began to speak. He explained almost hesitantly that they weren't going to be able to give me my trust funds my grandparents had intended. At first, I didn't fully grasp it, so I asked him to explain further. And that's when my dad continued, his voice filled with a mix of guilt and resignation as he admitted that over the years that they had used up all of Corey's trust fund on her. And when nothing was left, they had started to use money from my trust fund as well since they had access to mine. With a deep sigh, he admitted that 90% of my trust fund was gone already, and there was hardly anything left anymore for me. I was taken aback as I processed what he just said. The money that was meant for my future, for my education, was gone. He went on to explain that most of it had been spent on my sister's shopping addiction and the various treatments she required. As his words settled in, a numbness crept over me. My mind raced trying to understand how this had happened without me ever knowing. They had used my trust fund without telling me to support Corey's expenses and habits. I asked them why they would even do something like this to me. This is when my parents began explaining themselves, their voices filled with defensiveness. They told me that taking care of Corey has been financially draining, but they had no choice but to do it for her. Her needs always come first. My dad spoke about the endless expenses, the therapies, treatments, and, of course, the countless gifts she needed every week to keep her calm. I argued that they could have stopped buying her all those things when they realized that it was financially draining. However, they emphasized that for Corey, these items they bought for her weren't just luxuries, they were things that helped her cope, things that made her world a little easier to navigate. And that, they said, had been worth every penny, so they couldn't just refuse her. At that moment, I felt a surge of anger well up inside me. I asked them how they could possibly justify spending almost everything I had for my future without so much as a conversation with me. Did I not matter to them? My dad tried to calm me down, saying that I needed to understand what they had been going through. He talked about the pressure they'd felt, the sacrifices they'd had to make as Corey's caregivers, how exhausting it was to meet her needs week after week. My mom nodded, adding that Corey's condition required constant support, and sometimes that meant spending money in ways that might not be fair to me but were necessary for her and her needs. Both of them felt that since I didn't have any of Corey's conditions, I had an advantage over her anyway, so I should not act so greedy about the money. I felt a tear of frustration roll down my face as I told them that I wasn't questioning Corey's needs or their decision to prioritize her care. I loved her too, but this was about the lack of honesty, the way they'd gone behind my back and used what was supposed to be my future without ever thinking I deserved to know. I told them that this trust fund had been my one sense of security, the one thing I thought I could rely on to start my life independently. And now it was practically gone. But instead of acknowledging how hurt and betrayed I felt, they started to gaslight me by turning the conversation around on me. They told me they were disappointed that I couldn't be more understanding, that as Corey's sister, I should recognize that sometimes sacrifices were necessary and that after all, we were all in this together. I was shocked that they expected me to simply accept it all like a fool, to understand that Corey's needs had to come before mine. No questions asked. I asked them why it was always Corey and never me. Did they not want me to do anything with my life? This is when my parents went on to share a plan they had envisioned for my future, one that revolved around taking over the responsibility of caring for Corey. They explained that they never really cared about my education, since apparently it's not that important, and that all they expected from me was to step up and take over helping them with Corey's needs, both financially and emotionally. My mom looked at me with an expression that was part pleading and part resigned as she said, "You know, we're getting older, and it's exhausting looking after Corey. We won't be able to do this forever, so we need you to step in." She went on to explain that they didn't mind if I went to a local college nearby instead of the college of my choosing. She just hoped I find a stable job as soon as I graduated so I can then take Corey to live with me, and then finally my parents could have some rest. Dad suggested how I could even start contributing financially sooner while I was still in college by working a part-time job and sending some money home to Corey. They said it would help Corey have some independence in her life by letting her buy whatever it is that she wants and allow her to maintain the lifestyle they provided to her. I just sat there feeling numb, trying to comprehend what my parents expected me to do. At that moment, I felt utterly betrayed and frustrated. This wasn't the future I had imagined for myself. It was as if my parents expected me to give up my own dreams and plans, to seamlessly step into their role as Corey's caregiver without ever asking what I wanted for my own life. Finally, I yelled at them, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and hurt that had been building up for years. "Have you ever thought about what I want? Or am I just here to live for Corey? You never even thought to ask me what I wanted, did you? All these years, I've been expected to just give, and now you're pushing me to be Corey's caretaker so you can rest. How is any of this fair?" My voice cracked as the frustration poured out. "You're making decisions for me without even considering what it means for my life. I can't just drop everything for Corey and pretend like my dreams don't matter." All of my bottled-up frustrations came pouring out. Years of feeling overlooked, years of being told I needed to put Corey first, years of watching them cater to her every whim while I was expected to quietly support from the sidelines. My parents kept trying to convince me, saying that I should not be so self-centered and inconsiderate. It was like they expected me to fall in line and accept a life I never planned for just because they thought it was what was best for Corey. So since last week, I have been straight up ignoring my parents. All I feel for them is resentment. Ida, if I report my parents for stealing my trust fund and using it on my sister, update 1. Wow. This post has blown up in a few hours. Thanks to all your advice. I'm currently on my way to tell my grandparents everything. Since the trust fund came from their money, I feel it's important to have their support as I address this situation. After explaining everything to them, I plan to let my grandparents take the lead in deciding what we should do next. I trust their judgment and know they'll have my best interest in mind as we figure out how to handle this together. The reason I had kept my mouth shut all this time was because I honestly thought my parents would eventually come around, but clearly they haven't. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since my last update, so I did tell my grandparents everything. Like me, they were shocked when they found out that my parents had used my trust fund without my permission. That same week, everything came to a head when my grandparents came to confront my parents about what had happened with my trust fund. My grandparents had worked hard to set up that fund for both me and Corey, and they had been deeply invested in ensuring we would have the financial support we needed for our futures. So they were understandably angry at my parents for illegally using the funds behind their backs. My mom and dad responded by telling them the same sob story they had shared with me. They explained once again how they had been forced to use the money for Corey's care and therapies. They asked my grandparents to understand why they had done what they did, as though their reasoning would somehow make it all right. But my grandfather wasn't having any of it. He yelled at them, his voice full of frustration and disbelief. He told them in no uncertain terms that they were responsible for paying the full amount of the trust fund regardless of the circumstances or the reasons they had for using it. It was clear that he felt betrayed by my parents' actions, and his anger was palpable. For a moment, I thought maybe they'd finally take responsibility and make things right. Then my mother, looking panicked, turned to my grandparents and started pleading with them. She explained how taking care of Corey wasn't easy and how her needs were immense and constant. She admitted that Corey's trust fund simply wasn't enough to cover the mounting costs of her treatments and the ongoing expenses. She justified that using money from my trust fund helped them take care of Corey. And then, in an almost cruel turn of events, my parents turned on me. They scolded me for revealing everything to my grandparents. They were furious that I had exposed their actions and made them face the consequences. My dad, in particular, was livid and told me with a sharp edge to his voice that I should consider myself lucky because I was born normal unlike Corey, and that I should not resent my sister so much. It was as if my entire life, my struggles, my own needs didn't matter at all. All that mattered was Corey, and I was being punished for not falling in line with the role they had chosen for me. Without thinking, I just looked them dead in the eye and told them straight up that if they didn't pay me back the money I was owed, I would sue them and make sure they went to jail for what they had done. I reminded them that what they had done was illegal, and there was no way they could justify their actions in court. The trust fund was meant for me and me alone, and they couldn't prove otherwise. My voice was calm, but the words were clear and firm. I could see the color drain from my parents' faces as they processed what I had said. It was the first time I had truly stood up for myself, and I could see the shock in their eyes. They weren't used to me being so direct, so resolute. Meanwhile, my grandparents, thankfully, nodded in agreement. They were supporting me as they knew that I was right. Seeing their support, I continued, now speaking with more conviction. I told my parents that it didn't matter what they had spent on Corey or how much they had done for her. Corey was their child, and it wasn't my responsibility to sacrifice my future for her. I love Corey, of course, and I would always be there for her, but I wasn't going to give up my own life, my education, my dreams, just to make sure she felt cared for. I made it clear that I was tired of constantly coming second to her, tired of being pushed to the side while her needs always took priority. I ended by saying that I was done with them. I was done being treated like the invisible child, the one who was expected to quietly accept whatever scraps were left for her. The first time in my life, I finally stood up for myself, and I knew it was something I couldn't take back. My parents had pushed me to this breaking point, and I wasn't going to let them continue to control my life and future. My dad immediately argued, his voice full of disbelief and anger, that I couldn't threaten them with jail. He said that as their child, I should have some kind of family loyalty and that I should be always willing to support them, especially after everything they've done for me over the years. His words were meant to make me feel guilty, to remind me of my duty to them. My mom, trying to soften the situation, even chimed in, suggesting that since there was still 10% of my trust fund left, I could just take that and keep my mouth shut. It felt like they were treating me like I was some kind of charity case, as if the remaining crumbs of my trust fund were all I deserved and I should just forget everything else. But my grandfather wasn't backing down. He stepped in firmly, and his voice was resolute as he told my parents that if they didn't agree to pay me back the entire amount, he would hire the best lawyer in town so I could sue them. The threat of legal action seemed to have a profound impact on my parents. They finally fell silent, realizing that my grandfather meant business. After a tense back and forth, they reluctantly agreed that what they had done was wrong. Still, they asked my grandparents for some time to think things over. However, the fallout didn't just end there. My dad was livid with me for exposing them to my grandparents and for threatening him and mom with jail time. In his anger, he told me that he never wanted to see my face again. He asked me to move out of his house, telling me how he was done supporting a selfish person like me who could backstab their own family this way. Hearing this, my grandparents immediately offered for me to move in with them. They told me I always have a place with them and that they would support me in whatever way they could as I figured out my next steps. So without a second thought, I packed up my clothes, gathered my important documents, and moved out of my parents' place. Currently, I am living with my grandparents. I hate how my parents just kicked me out, but I am also glad to be away from them. I miss Corey a lot. I know I have ruined my relationship with my family forever after what I did, but I don't regret standing up for myself. Update 3. It's been a month since my last update. My parents, after a lot of pressure and legal threats from my grandfather, finally signed an agreement that my grandfather's lawyer drew up. The terms were straightforward. Since they couldn't repay the full amount they had taken from me in one lump sum, they would make payments over the next 18 months. This would allow them time to pay off the debt gradually without causing a major strain on their finances all at once. The agreement, though, also had a critical stipulation. If they failed to make any payment on the agreed-upon date or if they didn't follow through at all, both I and my grandparents had the right to take immediate legal action. This stipulation was a safeguard, a way to make sure they couldn't avoid paying me back. My parents are still furious with me. They blame me for everything that's happened, and it feels like they can't let go of the anger or shame they're carrying. They still don't understand why I took the steps I did and why I stood up for myself in such a drastic way. But despite their resentment, my grandmother has been reassuring me that none of this is my fault. She reminded me again today that I did what I had to do to protect myself and my future and that I should focus on moving forward now, not looking back. As for Corey, I do see her from time to time. She misses me, and I miss her too. She often asks my parents about me, and it's clear she doesn't fully understand the whole situation, but she knows enough to grasp that something major happened between us.